Why does suffering continue even after you've prayed, even after you've repented and tried to move forward? Why do the consequences of sins that you've committed years ago seem to reach into the present? And what does a loving God do when justice has been ignored for generations? What we'll see in 2 Samuel chapter 21 is one of the most heartbreaking chapters, difficult chapters in the Old Testament. We're going to see a famine, we're going to see people breaking the covenant, we're going to see heartbreaking loss, and we're even going to see some courage in this episode. But beneath all these difficult events lies one of Scripture's most profound truths that we've seen time and time again, that God never forgets his covenant. Human beings ignore promises. We overlook injustice. We can even try to change what has happened in the past. We do a horrible job at trying to make amends. But God remains faithful to every word that he has spoken. And in this episode, we're going to see that God teaches us something, that justice is never separated from his faithfulness. And we're going to see all of this in this episode of Biblical Unlocks. This show is designed to help build your habit of reading the Bible, understanding the Bible, and applying it in your daily life. If you enjoy episodes like this, please consider following and rating the show. It's free, it helps you out a lot, and you can always change your mind later. Now let's get a little bit of context into the chapter. Okay, so chapter 21 of 2 Samuel. So this chapter takes place after the rebellion of Absalom has ended. We see Sheba's revolt in the previous chapter has been crushed, and instead of continuing chronologically, the author actually begins, the author of 2 Samuel begins a concluding section, which is going to go from chapters 21 to 24 in this book, that looks back at several important events from David's reign. So these final chapters are arranged theologically rather than chronologically. So the first event concerns a severe famine. For 3 consecutive years, Israel experienced failed harvests, and David does what righteous kings should do. He seeks the face of the Lord, and God reveals the reason. Years earlier, Saul had violated Israel's ancient covenant with the Gibeonites by attempting to destroy them, although Israel had sworn an oath to protect the Gibeonites in Joshua chapter 9. Saul ignored that covenant, and as a result, we see now, well, Saul is dead, for one, and the injustice remains unresolved. The point is, the chapter is again exploring one of the Bible's deepest themes, that God remembers his promises long after people forget them. And the chapter is sort of divided into 2 halves. We see justice for Saul's broken covenant, and then we see David's final military victories against the Philistine giants. So together, these 2 halves teach that the kingdom of God is preserved through both our faithfulness to the covenant, but also divine strength. Alright, so let's read verses 1 to 9. Focus here is going to be on the famine and the Gibeonites. My question to you is, why does God care about promises that were made generations before, right? So long ago. Why does God still care about those? Okay, let's read. Now there was a famine in the days of David for 3 years, year after year, and David inquired of the Lord. The Lord said, "There is blood guilt on Saul and on his house, because he put the Gibeonites to death." So the king called the Gibeonites and spoke to them. Now the Gibeonites were not of the people of Israel, but of the remnant of the Amorites. Although the people of Israel had sworn to spare them, Saul had tried to wipe them out in his zeal for the people of Israel and Judah. David said to the Gibeonites, "What shall I do for you? How shall I make expiation, that you may bless the heritage of the Lord?" The Gibeonites said to him, "It is not a matter of silver or gold between us and Saul or his house, neither is it for us to put anyone to death in Israel." He said, "What do you say that I should do for you?" They said to the king, "The man who consumed us and planned to destroy us, so that we should have no place in all the territory of Israel, let 7 of his sons be handed over to us, and we will impale them before the Lord at Gibeon, on the mountain of the Lord." The king said, "I will hand them over." Verse 7, but the king spared Mephibosheth, the son of Saul's son, Jonathan, because of the oath of the Lord that was between them, between David and Jonathan, son of Saul. The king took the 2 sons of Rizpah, daughter of Aiah, whom she bore to Saul, Armoni and Mephibosheth, and the 5 sons of Merab, daughter of Saul, whom she bore to Adriel, son of Barzillai, the Meholathite. he gave them into the hands of the Gibeonites, and they impaled them on the mountain before the Lord. The 7 of them perished together. They were put to death in the first days of harvest, at the beginning of barley harvest. Okay, so the first thing, the famine lasts 3 years, so we see that's how the chapter begins. There was a famine in the days of David, 3 years, year after year. So David asked God, what is going on? So again, this is distinguishing David from other kings. The nation sought idols, omens, all of these things. David seeks the Lord. And God basically answers, it's because of Saul, okay? What he's done, he put the Gibeonites to death, and this is why you're paying the consequences for Saul's actions. But why are you judging Israel for something Saul did years earlier, right? That doesn't make sense. Well, in Joshua chapter 9, Israel swore before God, right? This is a covenant in Joshua chapter 9, and you can go back to that episode. It's available, and I'll even put a link to it under this episode. But Israel swore before God to protect the Gibeonites. Although the treaty, again, was obtained through deception, Joshua refused to break it because God's name had been invoked. However, Saul later violated that oath. Human beings had forgotten, but God does not forget. So God is keeping his character covenantal, and he remembers his promises. But the Gibeonites, right, when David asks, how shall I make atonement to you? The Gibeonites refuse money. We don't want money. But they ask for 7 descendants of Saul. And we read this and we're thinking, oh my gosh, this is so horrific. Why would they want 7 of Saul's sons? But we need to make a few observations here. The first thing is, the ancient covenant context is very different to our modern sort of legalistic governmental systems. Second, the narrative describes what happened. It is actually not a general command. It's not saying what is being done is actually good. It's describing what is happening. There is a difference between what the Bible prescribes and what it describes. Okay? It's not prescribing these actions, not at all. And the third thing is, the focus here is not revenge or personal revenge. It is covenant justice for national wrongdoing. The Gibeonites have actually lived under Israel's protection by covenant. Saul violated that covenant, and now they're paying the consequences. But this is one of the Bible's hardest passages, and the thing is, the fact that we wrestle with this is actually a good sign. The point that we need to remember from this is that God does not overlook injustice simply because time has passed. It was Saul's responsibility to look after the Gibeonites. He did not do that, and now he pays the consequences for those actions. That is not to say that the God of the Bible actually prescribes these actions here. Okay, let's read verses 10 to 14. We're going to see Rizpah's extraordinary love, and we're going to see that the narrative suddenly focuses on Rizpah. So, verse 10, Then Rizpah, the daughter of Aiah, took sackcloth and spread it on a rock for herself from the beginning of harvest until rain fell on them from the heavens. She did not allow the birds of the air to come on the bodies by day, or the wild animals by night. When David was told what Rizpah, daughter of Aiah, the concubine of Saul, had done, David went and took the bones of Saul and the bones of his son Jonathan from the people of Jabesh-Gilead, who had stolen them from the public square of Bethshan, where the Philistines had hung them up. On the day the Philistines killed Saul on Gilboa, he brought up from there the bones of Saul and the bones of his son Jonathan, and they gathered the bones of those who had been impaled. They buried the bones of Saul and of his son Jonathan in the land of Benjamin in Zelah, in the tomb of his father Kish. They did all that the king commanded. After that, God heeded supplications for the land. Alright, so as I said before, the narrative switches and suddenly focuses on Rizpah, and after the executions we see the story is slowing down a little bit, okay? So we see a woman arriving, Rizpah, who's actually one of the concubines of Saul, and she spreads sackcloth upon a rock day after day, night after night. She guards the bodies, she drives away the birds, the wild animals, and the text actually, like what we see here, is it doesn't say how long this occurs for. Perhaps weeks, months, we don't know. But she refuses to leave. And the point of this little section is that this woman, Rizpah, has basically no political power. She has no military strength, no influence, but she has faithful love. And that's the important thing. These men may have died under judgment, but they will not be abandoned. Love continues honoring even amid unbearable sorrow. Okay, so the Bible frequently highlights unnamed or overlooked acts of faithfulness, but God notices what history forgets. This is important. Some of the greatest acts of faithfulness are only known to God. And why does Rizpah move David? Well, eventually, David hears about her, and something changes within him. He retrieves Saul's bones, Jonathan's bones, the remains of all of those executed. He gives them an honorable burial, right? That's what's important here. And we see that the famine actually ends after this, right? God heeded supplications for the land. That's the end of the chapter. So Rizpah's faithful love is actually the catalyst for national healing in this sense. It's interesting, right? One small action causes this great change. So that's also really important. So even those who have fallen remain human beings made in God's image, right? And justice, in a sense, should not be cruelty. Those who are killed must be honored and respected. And so there's a balance here between justice and compassion that reflects God's character. Okay, let's read the final section of the chapter, verses 15 to 22. Focus here is going to be the giants falling. Okay, so we're going to see 4 giant stories here. So stories about giants, not big stories. All right, let's read. Verse 15. The Philistines went to war again with Israel, and David went down together with his servants. They fought against the Philistines, and David grew weary. Ishbi-Benob, one of the descendants of the giants, whose spear weighed 300 shekels of bronze, and who was fitted out with new weapons, said he would kill David. But Abishai, son of Zeruiah, came to his aid and attacked the Philistine and killed him. Then David's men swore to him, "You shall not go out with us to battle any longer, so that you do not quench the lamp of Israel." After this, a battle took place with the Philistines at Gob. Then Sibbecai, the Hushathite, killed Saph, who was one of the descendants of the giants. Then there was another battle with the Philistines at Gob, and Elhanan, son of Jar-Oregim, the Bethlehemite, killed Goliath, the Gittite, the shaft of whose spear was like a weaver's beam. There was again war at Gath, where there was a man of great size, who had 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot, 24 in number. He too was descended from the giants. When he taunted Israel, Jonathan, son of David's brother Shimei, killed him. These 4 were descendants from the giants. In Gath they fell by the hands of David and his servants. So a few things. We see that there are some stories about giants here, and they want to essentially summarize David's entire reign. The king who defeated Goliath is now growing old, and time changes every leader. David can't fight forever. But what's interesting here, and I think the most important thing here, is that David's men tell him, "You shall not go out with us to battle any longer, so that you do not quench the lamp of Israel." Verse 17, right at the end. Why exactly? Earlier David, he insisted on facing Goliath alone, but now others want to protect him. They know that his leadership is going to change with age, and David accepts it. Instead, he empowers others. Healthy leaders, right? They know when to step back, they know when to lead from the front, and they know how to strengthen those who now carry that responsibility. So the deepest lesson, though, from 2 Samuel chapter 21 is that God's covenant faithfulness is what governs all of history, okay? People will forget promises, but God remembers. We ignore injustices, God addresses it, and, we're going to grow old, okay? And eventually we're going to have to step back and let someone else take our position. And what's interesting as well is people will suffer profound grief, and yet God sees quiet faithfulness. What we see here is that God's faithfulness is perfect, and that history is guided by his faithfulness. Alright, so let's see how this chapter fulfills Jesus Christ. So this chapter points to Jesus in a few profound ways. The first one is that famine reminds us that sin creates a debt that human beings cannot ignore. Justice must always be satisfied. God does not overlook evil. Yet, unlike the events of this chapter where the consequences of Saul's sin fall within Israel's covenant history, the gospel presents something even greater, because Jesus willingly bears the judgment that we deserve. That's why we read in Romans chapter 3 verse 25 to 26 that God presented Christ as a propitiation by his blood, so that he might be just and the justifier of the one who has faith in Jesus. So at the cross, Jesus bears our sin, and we see justice and mercy meet perfectly there. And the second thing is, we see Rizpah. Okay, Rizpah has a faithful vigil which beautifully anticipates the women who remained near Jesus after his crucifixion. Many disciples fled. Faithful love remained with these women who were near Jesus. So God notices those who stay near suffering, and we see at the end that David grows weak, This king, David, once defeated Goliath, but now he needs saving himself. And the truth is, David was never meant to be the ultimate hope of Israel. Every earthly king is going to weaken, every earthly leader is going to die, but Jesus Christ is different, because the risen son of David never grows weary, he never ages, he never needs rescuing, right? Because Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. Hebrews chapter 13, verse 8. David's lamp eventually goes out, but Jesus Christ is the light of the world whose kingdom never ends. Alright, so let's see how we can apply this chapter in our everyday life. The most important thing I see is that we need to reflect God's covenant faithfulness. We treat our promises as if they carry no weight, right? In marriages, in friendships, ministry, all of these things, we'll say things and not keep it. So we need to be very clear about what we say, who we are, and how we act, because our commitments are really important in reflecting God's character, because God always keeps his commitments. And if we try and be like Christ, if we try and walk in his precepts, why aren't we keeping our promises as well? Alright, so that's it for this episode of Biblical Unlocks. We saw that God remembers every covenant even when we forget. Integrity means honoring costly promises, because that is the character of God. God's justice is always accompanied by compassion, and that David's growing weakness points us to the eternal strength of Jesus Christ. In 2 Samuel chapter 22, we're going to see David break into one of the longest songs of praise in the entire Old Testament, and he's going to look back over his lifetime of dangers, betrayals, victories, failures. He declares, "The Lord is my rock and my fortress and my deliverer." We're going to go through that in tomorrow's episode. You don't want to miss it. But that's it for this episode of Biblical Unlocks. If you enjoyed this episode, please feel free to rate the show and follow. It's free, it helps me out a lot, and you can always change your mind later. Otherwise, just have a blessed day. And remember, if you're not in your word, you're in your feelings. Godspeed.